Genius, you just tested 3M bioweapons on the galaxy's quietest monsters. I have been sitting 1.4 meters below floor level in this chamber for 11 years, and today is the last time I will write that down. The stone is already on the table in front of me, pale, smooth, the size of a thumbnail. I set it there before the session opened, the way I always do, and I have not looked at it since. 29 years ago, a xenobiologist named Dr. Yenna filed a 2,900-page sapience classification with this compact. It was received. It was time-stamped. It was entered into the permanent archive. 3 years later, 1,127 days, to be exact, the compact's licensing board issued research authorization 7 Doral Vos to the Rithvari Dominion for biological compound trials on a world called Arden 7F. I have both documents. I have had both documents for 17 years. Today, for the first time, I am going to put them on the same table. The Rithvari Dominion called this session. I want to be clear about that. They called it to accuse humanity of obstructing licensed research. They scheduled it, they filed the opening brief. They sent the formal notification to our office on Way Station Orvath Null 9 Light Towers out, and they sat back and waited for us to come and answer for ourselves. We came. Convocation Anchorage Vethdoral is built into the orbital shell of a decommissioned generation ship. Somebody made an architectural choice at some point to keep the original superstructure visible through the chamber's upper windows. Great curved ribs of old alloy, dark against the star field. The bones of a ship that carried 40,000 people across 300 years and was then gutted and turned into a courthouse. The ceiling is 44 meters up. The white stone of the chamber walls is not stone at all. It is a composite material engineered to absorb sound in the mid-frequency range and return it slightly flattened, which makes every voice in this room sound more authoritative than it actually is. I noted that in my first session log. I have noted it every year since. The human delegate platform is recessed 1.4 meters below the main floor. This is not an accident. The compact's original charter designates seating tiers by registration seniority, and humanity registered late. We registered late because we were not invited early. We were not invited early because the compact was largely built by Rithvari Dominion architects who were not, at the time, particularly interested in what a single system species from a mid-range yellow star had to contribute to galactic health governance. By the time we were registered, the tiers were fixed. The physical arrangement has been noted in my session log every year for 11 years under the heading, Architecture of Expected Deference. I have 71 registered species above me in this room. I have Convocant Primarch Dale Vorath at the central podium, 2.3 meters tall, his bioluminescent gill-bands glowing amber along his dorsal ridge. Amber meaning confident, amber meaning certain, amber meaning he has presided over this chamber for 31 years without a single successfully contested license revocation, and sees no particular reason today should be different. He set his authority seal on the podium at session open, a pressed resin disc the size of a dinner plate, engraved with the compact's founding charter text. He sets it there at every session. It has never meant anything except that he arrived. I have not looked at him since he entered. Here is what I need you to understand before anything else happens in this room. In 2853, the Rithvari Dominion's Biological Research Division identified a world in the Kasali Reach sector, registered in human navigation charts as Arden 7F. Called Karath Below in the language of the people who had been living there for approximately 4,000 years. The Dominion submitted a biological research licensing application to this compact. The application classified the native population of Arden 7F as non-sapient, subcommunicative, and suitable for use as biological research medium. The compact's licensing board reviewed the application and issued a provisional authorization pending full xenobiological survey. They sent Dr. Yenna to do the survey. She spent 9 years on Arden 7F. 9 years embedded in the field, living close enough to the population she was studying that she learned to recognize individual ridge patterns at a distance. She was 34 when she arrived. She was 43 when she filed her report. The report was 2,900 pages long. The core finding occupied 3 paragraphs on page 7. The Orvesi, her name for them, derived from their own self-designation in the chemical tactile hybrid language she had spent 9 years learning to partially read, were sapient. Extraordinarily so. They communicated through a system of raised skin ridges on their hands and forearms, patterns that shifted during information processing and could be pressed against stone surfaces to leave permanent chemical impressions. A written record encoded in contact chemistry that no Rithvari scanner had ever been calibrated to detect. because no Rithvari researcher had ever gotten close enough to an Orvesi to realize there was something to detect. Veline's report also contained a Category Sigma supplemental finding. This was a classification she created herself because there was no existing category for what she had observed. The Orvesi were not dying from the compound trials the Dominion had been running during the survey period. They were adapting. And while they adapted, they were doing something else. They were keeping records. The classification was filed with this compact in 2862. It was received. It was logged. It was entered into the permanent archive. Research authorization, 7 Doral Voss, was issued to the Rithvari Dominion 1,127 days later. 14 of the 22 members of the licensing board that issued that authorization had been seated before the classification was filed. 11 of them were still seated when it was issued. The authorization does not reference the classification. It references the original 2853 survey application, which predates Veline's work by 9 years, and classifies the Orvesi as non-sapient, subcommunicative, and suitable for use as biological research medium. I have read the authorization many times. I have read it the way you read something you need to understand completely before you use it against the people who wrote it. I do not believe the licensing board made an administrative error. I believe they made a decision. There is a word for what we built in response to that decision. Operation Stillwater. I did not name it. That honor belongs to my predecessor, Ambassador Kurl Davanos, who retired 7 years ago after spending 22 years on this project and did not live to see this session. The name comes from something she said in the original briefing document. The surface must stay still. Everything we are building has to happen underneath. The directive was simple. Document the Orvesi documentation. Say nothing, file nothing. Challenge nothing. Wait for the Rithvari Dominion to bring this to a formal session themselves. 29 years. They did. My team has 5 members. I want to introduce them to you because what happens today does not belong to me alone. Dr. Yosef Ademi is our xenobiologist. He was Veline's graduate student, the last one she supervised before she left for Ardennes 7F. He carries her original field notebook everywhere he goes. Gray composite cover, 340 pages, every margin annotated in 2 colors of ink, blue for his own notes and red for hers, because he said once that he needed to be able to tell them apart and could not always. He eats cold rice from a metal container outside the chamber during recesses. The lid makes a particular sound when he opens it, a soft, pressurized click, and I have come to associate that sound with the specific quality of patience that does not perform itself. Commander Prael Orvin runs tactical. He has completed 5 covert observation rotations at Ardennes 7F. He's the only person on this team who has been to the surface, actually stood on the ground there, breathed the air there, watched the Orvesi move through their daily patterns in the light that filters through Ardennes 7F's upper cloud layer. He does not talk about it except to say once when pressed that the light there is unusual. I did not ask him to clarify. Some things are not mine to know yet. Sen Velras handles intelligence. For 16 years, she has held a licensed auditor certification inside Rithvari Pharmaceutical Data Networks, a legal access credential, obtained through standard channels, renewed annually, never flagged for irregular activity. In 16 years, she has not filed a single irregular report. What she has done instead is copy everything she found that was relevant into our sealed archive, which is staged on 4 physical servers in a room off this chamber's east annex that we call the index room. Everything she found. Every document, every internal communication, every receipt and registration and compound authorization and side effect report. 16 years of legal access to the inside of the system that did this, and she spent every day of it reading. Castle Orath manages communications and the index room. He has a photograph of Yenna Veline tacked above his workstation, a printed image, not digital, taken during her 3rd year on Ardennes 7F, in which she is standing in partial shadow and looking at something outside the frame. Below the photograph, transcribed onto a single sheet of paper in the ridge pattern notation that Dr. Adiz Enwafer taught him 3 years ago, is a list of 41 names. I will come back to the names. Dr. Adiz Enwafer is our interpreter. She is one of 9 humans currently alive who speak Orvesi, speak it at a functional level, meaning she can both produce and receive the chemical tactile components of the language, not just read its transcriptions. She learned it because someone had to. She has been learning it for 11 years. The process of practicing the tactile components of the language, the ridge contact sequences, the pressure patterns, the specific angles of hand position that change the chemical valence of what you are saying, left a mark on her left palm. A callus. Raised and slightly patterned, faint enough that you would not notice it unless you knew to look, a degree or two warmer than the surrounding skin. She showed it to me once early on, not long after we started working together. I did not understand what I was looking at. She said, "That's the point." Neither did they. The compact received Dr. Velane's sapience classification 3 years before Dale Vorath's board issued the research license. The timestamp is in their own archive. It has always been in their own archive. This is not something I discovered. This is something I read in a document that has been sitting in the compact's permanent archive for 29 years, available to any researcher with standard access credentials. Velras found it in her 4th year. She flagged it internally, filed nothing, and started building the folder that became the index room. We are not going to accuse the Rithvari Dominion today. We are going to accuse the compact. The session opened at 800 station time. Dale Vorath called it to order in the over-enunciated cadence he uses when he has not been interrupted in a long time. Precise, slightly slowed. The voice of someone who has learned to speak into rooms where no one pushes back. His gill-bands were amber. They have been amber every time I have seen them. The Rithvari Dominion presented its case for 51 minutes. It was clinical. It was organized. It covered licensed authorization documentation, compound trial records, and footage from 4 observation passes of human vessels in orbit above Arden 7F. The case was that humanity had been interfering with licensed research operations, positioning vessels, conducting unauthorized surface observations, and maintaining contact with the subject population in a manner inconsistent with research protocol. The case was not wrong on the facts. We had done those things. The footage was real. Dale Vorath referred to the Orvesi as research medium 11 times during the presentation. I counted. His gill-bands stayed amber the entire time. The recess came at 10:14. I stepped out of the chamber and walked to the east corridor, where Ademi was opening his rice container, that soft, pressurized click, and Orvin was standing with his back against the wall, eyes forward, not quite looking at anything. I had 3 minutes before I needed to be back inside. Elder Archivist Thesovan of the Velhari Compact was waiting for me at the corridor junction. The Velhari are small, gray, and slow-moving, and the Rithvari Dominion has spent decades treating their documentary submissions as administrative noise, tedious, over-detailed, and safe to deprioritize. Thesovan is the oldest member of the Velhari delegation and has, by her own count, read every xenological filing this compact has received in 60 years. She carries a tablet with a matte surface that she holds two-handed, like something fragile. This was not the first time we had spoken. We had been in correspondence for 14 months. She said, "I have been waiting for someone to do this for a very long time." I told her we had been waiting for someone to call the session. She had a list, 9 species, each of them carrying some version of the same wound, biological sovereignty violated, sapience contested, classification standards applied by Rithvari-led boards in ways that served Rithvari research interests. I had known about the list for 6 years. I had had briefs prepared for all 9 of them for 6 years, sitting in folders on the index room servers, waiting for exactly this conversation. I sent Ademi to deliver them. He took his rice container with him. I don't know why I didn't ask. The second part of the Rithvari presentation resumed at 10:42. More footage. More authorization documentation. Dale Vorath had added 3 additional exhibits since the recess, which meant someone on his team had been doing the same math I was doing and had decided to add weight to the licensed authorization argument before I had a chance to respond. It was a reasonable move. If the session stayed on the question of whether humanity had interfered with licensed research, the answer was yes, and the compact's standard remedy was a formal censure and a research access restriction. That outcome was survivable for the Dominion. It was, in fact, exactly the outcome they were engineering. I let them finish. When Dale Vorath opened the response period, I stood up. From 1.4 meters below the main floor. The Broken Reach Rithvari are not a species. They are a faction, approximately 9,000 individuals within the Rithvari Dominion itself, concentrated in the outer systems, who have been filing internal dissent reports about the Arden 7F program for 22 years. Every report was submitted through proper channels. Every report was received, logged, and deprioritized. None of them were ever formally acknowledged. Velras obtained copies of all of them through the Dominion's own public disclosure archive. Legal access, standard process, auditor credentials. It took her 7 years to collect them all, because the Dominion's public disclosure structure is organized to make legal access as slow and unrewarding as possible, without technically violating its own transparency requirements. She was patient, she had time. The dissent reports established something specific and damaging. They established that the Rithvari Dominion's own internal apparatus had raised questions about the Ardennes 7F program's classification basis as early as 22 years ago. The questions were raised, documented, and buried. The program continued with full internal knowledge that its foundational classification was contested. The Compact's licensing board issued renewed authorizations 5 times after the first descent report was filed. When I tabled the descent archive as our second exhibit, Dale Voreth's gill-bands had not yet changed. He was watching me with the practiced stillness of someone who has learned to wait out procedural challenges, the posture of a man who has seen this kind of filing before and knows it rarely goes anywhere. He was right that it rarely goes anywhere. He was wrong about today. The third exhibit was a single document. I carried it to the podium myself. Not a data file, not a transmission, a physical document, printed on archival paper, the kind that does not degrade. I set it on the podium surface in front of Dale Voreth. Then I stepped back to the human platform and sat down. I did not explain it. The document was Dr. Yenavelin's 2862 Sapience classification filing, the original, stamped on every page with the Compact's own receipt mark, the specific imprint that means. This was received by this institution on this date and entered into its permanent archive. The stamp on the cover page is dated 2862. Research Authorization 7 Doral Voss, also in the document stack, is dated 1,127 days later. The timestamp explained itself. Dale Voreth looked at it for a long time. His gill-bands were still amber, but the amber had changed quality. It was holding, the way something holds when the mechanism that produces it is working harder than it should have to. The chamber was very quiet. This was not, I want to be clear, an accusation against the Rithvari Dominion. They had submitted a licensing application and been granted an authorization. What they did after that was legal, by the terms of the authorization they received. The question was not whether the Rithvari had acted within their license. The question was whether the license should ever have been issued. That was a question about the Compact. That was a question about this room, and this institution, and the 14 members of the licensing board who were seated before the classification arrived and issued an authorization anyway, and the 29 years of renewed authorizations that followed, and the 41 Orvesi who died during the trial period while classified in the Compact's records as substrate units numbered 1 through 41. I placed the document on the podium. I sat down, I waited. The timestamp explained itself. The chamber did not move when I sat down. 71 species. A ceiling 44 meters up. A man at the podium who had not lost a session in 31 years, looking at a document I had placed in front of him without explanation. And the only sound in the room was the faint, mechanical hum of the Compact's environmental systems, which run at a frequency just low enough that you stop hearing it until the room goes completely still. The room was completely still. I need to tell you something about the Orvesi before the next part of this session, because it is the piece the Compact's licensing board missed entirely, or chose to miss. And it is the piece that changes everything. When the Rithvari Dominion began its compound trials on Ardennes 7F, the Orvesi were not passive. They were watching, they were naming, and they were writing it all down. Their language, the chemical tactile ridge pulse system that Velane spent 9 years learning to partially read, encodes memory in a way that no Rithvari scanner was built to detect. When an Orvesi presses their hand to a stone surface and traces a ridge pattern sequence, they leave a chemical impression that can be read back by anyone who knows the language. The impressions persist. They do not degrade the way biological material should, because the Orvesi developed, over thousands of years, a method of chemically fixing their records into the stone itself, the same way you would cure something to make it last. Their entire historical record is in stone. Libraries of it, rooms of it, 19 years of it, compiled during the exact period the Compact's licensing board believed they were studying a non-communicative, non-sapient population suitable for use as research medium. The Orvesi were keeping researcher names. They were keeping vessel registration numbers. They were keeping compound sequences and dosage records and side effect progressions, because they understood what was being done to them, and they understood that understanding it was not enough. Someone had to remember it. Someone had to write it down. Someone had to keep the record against the possibility that a day would come when the record could matter. 19 years. The Compact's records list 41 Orvesi who died during the trial period. They are listed as substrate units numbered 1 through 41. No names, no ages, no kinship designations, No record of who was present when they died or what compound was being tested that day or whether the researchers noted anything beyond the basic outcome data. The Orvesi record lists all 41 of them with their full kinship designations, the multi-generation relational names that place each individual in a network of family and community and obligation. It lists their ridge pattern signatures. It lists the researchers who were in the room. It lists the compounds. It lists the dates. It lists the names of everyone who remembered them, and the names of those people's children, and the names of those children's children. Enwafer spent 6 years translating that section of the archive alone. I want to tell you how I found out about Enwafer, not because it is central to what happens today, but because it is the part I have never written in a session log. Ademi found her. 3 years into still water, when we had the outline of the Orvesi record but no one who could read it, he sent me a file with a single name in it and a note that said, "She learned it because the world needed someone too." I called her. She picked up on the second ring. She already knew who I was. That was 11 years ago. I have not once in 11 years asked her why she started learning Orvesi. It seemed like the kind of question whose answer was already visible if you were paying attention. The callus on her palm was reason enough. The response session reconvened at 1340. I want to be precise about the sequencing here, because the order mattered and I had planned it for 6 years. First, the coalition. Elder Archivist Thesovin returned to her bench at the Velhari position, above me, on the main floor as it should be. Ademi had delivered the briefs to all 9 allied delegations during the recess. 8 of 9 confirmed receipt. The 9th, the Yield Freelanes, whose communication protocols require a secondary authentication step, confirmed 30 minutes later while Dale Vorath was presenting his additional exhibits. 9 species, each of them carrying documentation of a different version of the same institutional failure. The Pelari, reclassified as subsapient in 2853, and contesting that designation for 38 years without resolution, 38 years of formal grievance filings. Each one received, logged, and deprioritized by the same board structure that had received Velane's classification, and issued a license anyway. The Dorvan Assembly, whose biological sovereignty had been classified as conditional pending a Rithvari-led review process that had been pending for 26 years. The Ainari, the Kassali Reach, the Torvith, the Asanul, each of them with a brief in a folder on Castle's servers, waiting for exactly this session. I had prepared those briefs in 2855. Some of them had been updated annually. Some of them I had not opened in years because they did not need updating. The violations were still ongoing and the record was still growing. At 1340 exactly, all 9 delegations filed simultaneous coordinated testimony with the Compact's Central Archive. 18,000 pages, 9 separate jurisdictional briefs, each one grounded in the Compact's own session record, its own authorization logs, its own filed decisions. We did not need external evidence. We used theirs. The delivery mechanism was the Compact's own broadcast infrastructure, the relay architecture that routes all official session materials to all 71 registered species simultaneously. Castle had researched the access protocols 4 years ago. Standard filing access, no special permissions required. He had been waiting to use it. By 1347, all 71 species had received all 18,000 pages. Dale Vorath's gill-bands were still amber when the simultaneous filing registered on the chamber's document system. The amber held for about 90 seconds. Then it began, not a sudden shift, not a dramatic change, but a slow dimming, the way light changes when something in the mechanism that produces it is working too hard to hold what it is holding. He did not speak. He did not object. He did not rise. He did not speak. The silence was entered into the session record by the chamber's automated logging system, which notes all non-response intervals longer than 45 seconds. The entry reads, response interval. Convocant Primarch Dale Vorath. Duration, 6 minutes 14 seconds. Status, no verbal response recorded. 6 minutes and 14 seconds. In 31 years of presiding over this chamber, that entry had never appeared next to his name. This is the part I need you to hold in your mind, because everything that came before was preparation for this, and everything that comes after is consequence. Enwafer stood up. She did not walk to the podium. She stood at the human delegate table, 1.4 meters below the main floor, the same recessed platform where I had been sitting for 11 years, the architecture of expected deference, and she set a small speaker unit on the table surface in front of her. It was a plain unit, Gray housing, palm-sized, the kind used for field audio playback when you are in a location without fixed speaker infrastructure. It looked wrong in that chamber, too small, too ordinary, nothing like the polished hardware at the main podium. It sat on the table like something someone had forgot to put away. She looked at me once. I picked up the stone. She played 4 minutes and 17 seconds of Orvesi communication, recorded on Ardennes 7F 6 weeks earlier by Commander Orvin on his 5th surface rotation. She translated it in real time, voice steady, into the chamber's primary relay. The Orvesi elder speaking has a name that does not move cleanly into any human language. The closest translation is something that feels like the one who kept the record when keeping was hard. She has been keeping the record for 19 years. She is not young. The recording was made in the low morning light of Ardennes 7F. Orvin mentioned the light, after the way he always does, and she speaks in the slow, deliberate ridge-pulse cadence of someone who has rehearsed what she is going to say many times, not because she is uncertain, but because she wants every word exact. She named the 41 dead. She gave their full kinship designations. She gave the researcher names who had been present at each death. She gave the compound sequences and the dosage amounts and the dates. She gave the vessel registration numbers of the ships that had carried the compounds to Ardennes 7F. She gave all of it, in order, in a language that no Rithvari scanner in the history of the Compact's biological research program had ever been calibrated to detect. The chamber was completely still. Enwafer translated every word. Dale Voreth's gill-bands were dark, not dimmed, dark, the way a light goes out, the way something stops rather than slows. I do not know if that is a physical response or a choice. With Rithvari bioluminescence, I am not sure the distinction holds. I did not look at him during the translation. I looked at Enwafer. She finished at 4 minutes and 17 seconds exactly. She turned off the speaker unit. She did not sit down. Thesovin rose from the Velhari bench. She is small. She moves carefully, the way people move when they are very old and have learned that their body requires attention. She held her matte surface tablet two-handed, and she did not raise her voice. She has never raised her voice in 60 years of filing, which I know because I read her session history in the 2nd year of Stillwater. And she said, in the flat documentary notation, the Velhari use for all official statements. I move formal no confidence in the Compact Licensing Board on the grounds of documented institutional foreknowledge. Within 4 minutes, all 9 Allied delegations had seconded the motion. Dale Voreth began to speak. I set the stone down. I said, with respect, Convocant Primarch, you studied them for 29 years and wrote down everything except the part where they were doing the same to you. His gill-bands did not return. He sat down. I set the stone back in my pocket. The post-climax hook is not mine to declare. It belongs to the Orvesi elder whose name translates as a feeling, not a word, and the question of what she will say when she stands in this chamber, for the first time at the next full session, is a question this room has never had to answer before. The no-confidence motion requires a 90-day review period. 14 of the 22 licensing board members have been placed under formal review pending archive audit. Dale Voreth's authority seal remained on the podium when the session closed. No one retrieved it. The Rithvari delegation filed a procedural objection within the hour. It was received, logged, and deprioritized by a Velhari Compact archivist named, I checked, Velorath Thesovin the Younger, who is Thesovin's former student and has been waiting to perform that specific action for 6 years. 31 years of being deprioritized. Used once in one direction against the one entity in this chamber that had believed it would never apply to them. Ademi was in the east corridor when I came out of the session room. He was eating cold rice. The lid of the container was open on the floor beside him, and he was looking at the wall, and he did not look up when I sat down next to him. We stayed there for a while. Neither of us said anything that needed saying. Orvin was at the end of the corridor with his back against the wall and his eyes closed. He looked like someone listening for something. I thought about asking him what the light was like on Ardennes 7F in the morning in the low, cloud-filtered hours before the temperature shifted. I did not ask. I will ask him sometime, not today. Velras had already gone back to the index room. I could see light under the door. She was drafting the follow-on archive requests. The secondary filing chain that Stillwater had always planned would follow the first session, the next layer of the record, already in motion before the first layer had finished landing. Enwafer was at the human delegate table. She had not moved since the session closed. Her left hand was flat on the table surface in front of her, and she was not looking at it, and she did not need to. Castle found me in the index room about an hour after close. He had Velane's photograph in his hands, the printed one, the one of her standing in partial shadow looking at something outside the frame, taken in her third year on Ardennes 7F. He had taken it down from the wall above his workstation. He held it carefully. The way you hold something you have decided has a different place now. He said, should I put it somewhere better? I looked at the wall where it had been. Below the empty space, the 41 names were still there, transcribed on a single sheet of paper in Orvesi Ridge notation, in Enwafer's careful hand, each name taking up more space than a human name would because kinship designations are long, because the Orvesi believe a name should hold everything that matters about where a person came from and who they belonged to. I said the 41 names were always the better thing. He already knew that. He just needed to hear it said out loud. He set the photograph down on the table, face up, and went back to his station. The Compact's licensing board is suspended pending audit. The Pelari's 38-year contestation has been admitted for expedited review, the first time any species' multi-decade grievance record has been pulled from deprioritized status to active docket in the Compact's history. The Orvesi Elder, the one who kept the record when keeping was hard, has been formally invited to address the Compact's next full session. The invitation was issued same day, before the session logs had been filed. It is the first time a previously classified species has been extended that invitation. She will speak in Orvesi. Enwafer will translate. It will take as long as it takes. The 90-day review period started this morning. The legal reckoning is still arriving, still moving through channels and review processes and the slow machinery of institutional consequence, which grinds in the same direction whether you want it to or not once you have fed it the right material. We fed it 29 years of the right material. It will take the time it takes. I walked back through the chamber at close of business. The lights were on low, the Compact's night cycle settings, which dim everything except the emergency strips along the floor. The white composite walls absorbed the dim light the same way they absorb sound, flatly, without giving anything back. The human platform was still recessed 1.4 meters below the main floor. Dale Voretz's authority seal was on the podium, right where he had set it at the opening of the session, right where he had left it when the session closed. A pressed resin disc the size of a dinner plate, sitting in the low light of an empty chamber, waiting for someone to come and explain what it was authorized to mean now. I did not touch it. I put my hand in my left coat pocket, felt the stone smooth, pale, cool, and walked out.